Some people can go out to the field for the first time, pick up a transmitter, and don't even need an instructor next to them to be successful. But for most people, it takes a handful of times out at the field with an instructor before they're ready to fly solo. While this video won't make you ready to solo the next time you go out to the field, it will provide some useful solutions that could speed up your training if it feels like it's taking forever. Number 1. Self-taught versus having an instructor. There's a vocal minority of people out there that are self-taught in our hobby. It's entirely possible, but there's a right way and an arguably less right way of doing it. If you want quicker success, you'll need to invest in a simulator setup unless you want to be crashing expensive aircraft on repeat. And that's what brings us to the other important thing. Get something durable enough to be crashed, because it will happen. If you do opt to go for the self-taught route, do your best to prevent building bad habits by watching instructional videos online by legit sources to supplement your sim work. Be sure that your sim time isn't just spent bashing sticks. You should have a clear goal of what you're trying to practice for the best results. Regardless, we recommend anyone trying to get into the hobby to go and find an AMA club near them with a training program and to find an instructor. Number 2. Learning plateaus. There's only so much one can learn in a day or even in one lesson. It's time to call it quits for the day when you find yourself no longer improving and feeling frustrated or flustered. A lot of people find themselves struggling with a concept and can't seem to materialize it. They call it a day, come back tomorrow, and find themselves conceptualizing it better. As a general rule, 3 to 4 instructional flights a day at the field is usually the line where people find themselves no longer improving. But figure out how to gauge it for yourself. There's an inverse to this rule as well. Don't keep your lessons too far apart. If you're only going out to the field once every month or two, it's going to be difficult to improve, because at least half of each lesson will be refreshing your memory on the previous lesson. We find that 2 or even more optimally, 3 times a week works out well for most students to succeed quickly and thoroughly in their training. Number 3. Sticking with the same instructor. If you find yourself with a different instructor at the field every time you fly, this could be holding you back. This might sound backwards because learning from a variety of people will teach you the most, right? Sort of. But balance is important. If you're hopping between instructors for every lesson, half of the time you'll spend learning that instructor's techniques and ways of doing things, and get an earful about why some other instructor's way of doing it is wrong. Not to mention, once you establish a rapport with someone and understand how to communicate with them, your learning will accelerate. So, what about the balance we talked about before? Just make sure that roughly 75% of your time spent learning is with the same instructor. There's nothing wrong with mixing in a couple other instructors' techniques into your own personal flying soup, or so to speak, to make it work for you in your final recipe. Another important thing when deciding who that instructor will be is to make sure they're a good fit, and more importantly, make sure they can fly. Since clubs rely on volunteers, oftentimes there's an instructor or two at the field that really shouldn't be instructing, but because the club is short-handed, they instruct anyway. Watch how your instructor flies. Do his aircraft routinely make it home and maintain directional control on the runway during the takeoff and landing? Does it seem like they're struggling compared to other people flying? Do they fly a wide variety of aircraft and flying styles well and proficiently? Do they have full-scale experience? Not all of these factors matter, but try to be cognizant of at least some of them when picking a long-term instructor. Sometimes you can't pick and choose your instructor though, and that's where our friends from PCBWay come in, and they're this week's sponsor. They offer a variety of services from PCB production to assembly and even 3D printing. But it doesn't stop there. They have sheet metal fabrication, injection molding, and even CNC machining. If you need to redesign a motor mount or manufacture parts because your instructor still needs instructing, there's no better service out there. They're also great if you're into scratch building and need custom parts. Their service is extremely easy to use and can get a quote right at your fingertips. If you're interested, please check out the link in our video description. Special thanks to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. Number 4. Meaningful mistakes. Mistakes are annoying, but they're a valuable tool. Ideally, first your instructor will praise your progress, then point out your mistakes, and then wrap things up by explaining why the mistakes happened and what to do to fix them. But sometimes, we're not always fortunate enough to have an instructor like that. Either way, after your flight is over, try and spend some time contemplating the mistakes you made and what you can do differently next time. Did you come into land at Mach Jesus and go around as a result? Come up with a system. Start pulling your power back before your base turn and lowering your nose to establish a constant approach path instead of winging it every time. Remember, learning is defined as a change in behavior as a result of an experience. Don't repeat bad experiences and expect a different result. Number 5. Common mistakes. Again, sometimes instructors miss things, and if you think your instructor might be missing something, consider this a brief FAQ of mistakes we see almost everyone make when learning. First up, over-controlling. Unless you're about to hit a tree, every input should be deliberate and small. We're not flying a missile, we're flying an airplane. If you want to start a right turn, your stick should gently move and only a fine amount. Don't jab. An easy way to figure out if you're doing this is if you find your thumb or fingers falling off the stick and hearing that nasty sound of the stick rebounding back to center. Or your flight looks all over the place. The next most common mistake is flying too far from yourself. It's great to set yourself up to have plenty of time to anticipate your descent for an approach, for example, but we see too many people flying a mile away from themselves. If you're struggling to see how the plane is responding to your inputs or what direction the plane is going, you are way too far away. And finally, this one only holds true if you are self-taught, because every instructor should know about this. We're talking about how to trim an airplane. If hands off at 50% throttle, the airplane isn't flying in a straight line, you might want to look into how to trim an aircraft. We find this to be something very rarely taught by instructors, and it's a critical skill to learn. We'll include a link in the description to a tutorial we like. Long story short, if you spend your entire flight fighting the airplane, you'll never learn how to fly it. Number 6. Reliable equipment in favorable conditions. It's important to set yourself up for success. Now, we know that you can't control the weather, but you can control what days you have a lesson. Going out when it's blowing 15 knots, gusting to 30, and expecting your bestest, most successful flight ever is a delusion. The same applies to buying a non-trainer aircraft to train on. Remember, function over form. As far as equipment goes, there's no reason you need to buy the most expensive everything out there, but on the same token, buying a water-damaged radio is only going to hold you back. Having reliable equipment means that when you go out to the field, you'll be ready to fly, instead of spending the majority of your allotted time with your instructor trying to figure out why your plane gives up elevator when you give right aileron input. Number 7. Perfect practice makes perfect. If you routinely practice something incorrectly, you're not going to make progress. Make sure you and your instructor have a clear understanding of what it is they want you to practice before you get up into the air, and then practice them. Have them demonstrate things as well. Maybe you've soloed and are trying to work on your landings. Just going up and winging every landing won't get you so far. Establish clear goals and a plan of attack for how you want to practice landing your airplane. Where and when will you cut the power? How will you correct your approach path if you end up too low? When do you plan on flaring? Where's your touchdown point? Having an answer to all these questions will keep practice consistent, which over time will lead to improvement. Number 8. Auto levelers. There are many different variations of this out there amongst many different brands, but in our experience, it's best to avoid using these while learning. At the most, once you're freshly completed with training and off the leash with your instructor, stick to having no more than a panic switch that auto-levels the airplane while you hold it if you want some peace of mind. But otherwise, flying a plane that returns to level every time you let go of the sticks will lead to terrible habits that are very difficult to unlearn. Do what works best for you, but be sure to keep this in mind if your plane has this technology with it. Number 9, it just hasn't clicked yet. As we said before, there's no shame in calling it a day if you find yourself frustrated. Eventually, there will be a lesson where it all comes together and just clicks. We can't explain it, but just know it's coming if you don't give up. Number 10, figure out what works best for you. Although we don't believe that you're better off teaching yourself, if you find that's what works for you, keep doing it. Same goes with any of the other advice in this video. Do what works for you. Just remember though, always be open to external advice from experienced pilots if you go this route. Otherwise, you'll potentially get stuck in arguably bad habits. At the end of the day though, you know yourself better than anyone else. Everyone learns at a different pace, but we hope this video served as a way to help you get to a pace you're happier with. Special thanks to our channel supporters. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you think we should teach my dog how to fly, or hit subscribe if you're interested in more tips for success in RC, because we have a lot of videos with tips in them. Happy landings, bounce one on for us, and we'll catch you next week with a new upload.